The morning the black SUVs rolled into the quiet street, people stopped mid-step and stared as if the sun itself had fallen from the sky. The sound of polished shoes hitting the pavement echoed louder than traffic, louder than chatter, louder than the clink of coffee cups. And at the center of it all stood a tired single father holding a simple paper cup, frozen in confusion, never imagining that his smallest act of kindness would summon men in suits and bodyguards to his doorstep. If you believe that kindness can change lives and that second chances matter, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Real Life Stories Hub so more people can hear stories that remind us humanity still exists in this world. Every weekday morning, under the soft gold light of the rising sun, Haris Nadim followed the same routine. He woke before dawn in his small rented apartment above a corner bakery, quietly preparing breakfast for his 6-year-old daughter, Syra. The smell of toasted bread and boiled eggs filled their tiny kitchen, and even when exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders, he forced himself to smile so she would never see how tired he truly felt. Since losing his wife 3 years earlier to a sudden illness, Haris had become both mother and father, protector and provider. His hands carried the burden of 2 lives, but his heart carried far more than that. After walking Syra to her school bus, Haris would stop at a modest coffee stall near the park. The stall owner knew him well enough to prepare his order without asking, a plain coffee with very little sugar, just enough to keep him steady through his shift at the auto repair shop. But it wasn't the coffee itself that made his mornings meaningful. It was the quiet figure sitting on the park bench nearby, wrapped in a faded gray shawl, her shoulders slightly hunched against the morning breeze. Her name was Razia Khatun, though few people cared enough to ask. She appeared every morning like clockwork, her face weathered by years of hardship, her eyes holding a quiet sadness that never demanded attention but always seemed to whisper a story no one had time to hear. At first, Haris noticed her simply because she reminded him of his own late mother, fragile yet dignified, even in struggle. One cold morning, when he saw her hands trembling as she tried to warm them against her thin shawl, he made a decision that felt small at the time. He ordered an extra cup of coffee and handed it to her without ceremony, without expecting thanks. From that day forward, it became routine. Every morning, 2 cups. One for him. One for Razia. No speeches, no questions, no awkward explanations. Just a quiet exchange of warmth between 2 strangers connected by nothing more than shared humanity. The coffee cost little, yet somehow it felt like the most meaningful part of his day. Razia never spoke much, but the faint smile that touched her lips each morning carried a silent gratitude that lingered longer than words ever could. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Summer sunlight replaced the chilly winter air, warming the park benches and brightening the mornings. Haris sometimes brought leftover bread or fruit from the bakery downstairs, slipping it into her hands as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He never spoke of his struggles to her, but she seemed to sense them anyway. There were mornings when his eyes looked heavier than usual, mornings when the bills stacked higher than his paycheck, mornings when he feared he might not be enough for his daughter. Yet, every time he handed Razia that cup, something inside him felt lighter. The people around the park noticed the routine too. Some admired him quietly, while others shook their heads, muttering that kindness was wasted on strangers. Haris ignored them all. He had learned the hard way that life could take everything from you without warning, and if he could spare even one person from feeling invisible, he would. Then came the morning that changed everything. The sunlight was bright and steady that day, casting long shadows across the pavement as Haris approached the coffee stall with his usual tired but determined steps. He ordered 2 cups as always, holding them carefully to keep the heat from escaping. But before he could reach the bench where Razia waited, a sudden commotion erupted at the edge of the park. 2 sleek black SUVs rolled slowly toward the curb, their tinted windows reflecting the morning light like mirrors. People paused mid-stride, whispering to each other, curiosity spreading like wildfire. The vehicles stopped directly beside Razia's bench, and the doors opened with mechanical precision. Tall men in tailored suits stepped out, followed by 2 bodyguards whose sharp eyes scanned the surroundings with practiced caution. Haris stood frozen, coffee cups trembling slightly in his hands. He watched as one of the suited men approached Razia with an expression that was neither harsh nor gentle, but deeply respectful. Razia, who had always appeared small and fragile, suddenly straightened her posture. The tired slump in her shoulders seemed to vanish, replaced by a quiet dignity that felt unfamiliar yet powerful. The man bowed his head slightly, offering her a folded document. The crowd gathered closer, whispers growing louder. Horace felt his heart pound against his ribs as confusion tightened around him like a knot. He stepped closer, still clutching the coffee, unsure whether to stay or disappear. What happened next left everyone speechless. Razia slowly turned toward Horace, her eyes glistening in the bright morning sun. For the first time, there was something unmistakably strong in her gaze, something that felt like hidden truth rising to the surface. The suited man spoke quietly to her, and though Horace couldn't hear the words, he saw her nod with quiet acceptance. The bodyguard stepped aside as if granting space for something deeply personal. In that moment, Horace felt an unexpected fear creeping into his chest. He feared losing this strange morning ritual that had become a thread of stability in his chaotic life. He feared that whatever was happening would pull Razia into a world far beyond his reach. As the crowd murmured, Razia reached out slowly and accepted the coffee from Horace's shaking hands. Her fingers brushed his briefly, and though no words were exchanged, the look she gave him carried more meaning than any speech could hold. Gratitude. Recognition. Something deeper, almost like pride. Then the suited man handed Horace another envelope, this one addressed directly to him. The paper felt heavier than it should have as he opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter explaining the truth that no one had expected. Razia Khatun was not simply a homeless woman forgotten by society. She was once the co-founder of a major charitable foundation, a woman who had built schools and hospitals before losing everything to betrayal and illness. She had chosen to live quietly among strangers after being abandoned by those she trusted, testing the world's compassion in its rawest form, and Horace had been the only person who treated her like a human being without expecting anything in return. The letter continued, explaining that Razia had recently been found by former associates who discovered her location. She had insisted on one condition before returning to her previous life, that the man who showed her kindness without recognition would receive the opportunity he deserved. Inside the envelope was a document offering Horace a full scholarship for his daughter's education at one of the best schools in the city, along with financial support to help him start his own repair business. It was not charity, the letter explained, but gratitude. Tears filled Horace's eyes as the weight of the moment settled over him. Years of silent struggle, sleepless nights, and endless sacrifices suddenly felt seen, acknowledged in a way he never thought possible. The crowd watched in stunned silence, realizing that the quiet acts they once overlooked had just rewritten someone's future. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to like, comment, and share your thoughts below, because stories like these remind us that kindness often returns in ways we never expect. As Razia stepped into the waiting vehicle, she turned once more toward Horace. The sunlight caught her face, illuminating the soft lines of a life filled with hardship and resilience. In that final glance, Horace felt a powerful realization bloom inside him, that kindness was never wasted, even when the world made it feel invisible. Days later, the park bench stood empty, yet the memory of those mornings remained etched in his routine. Horace opened his small repair shop months afterward, proudly hanging a modest sign bearing his name. Syra walked to her new school with excitement dancing in her steps, her future brighter than he had ever dared to imagine. Special request. Before this story ends, share in the comments one small act of kindness you've done or received, because your story might inspire someone else to believe in goodness again. And as the sun continued to rise each day over the same quiet street, Horace carried with him a lesson stronger than hardship itself. Sometimes the simplest acts, a warm cup of coffee, a gentle gesture, a moment of compassion, can echo louder than wealth, louder than power, louder than fear. They can rebuild hope in places where hope once felt impossible. If this story moved you even slightly, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, please take a moment now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Real Life Stories Hub, because every shared story keeps the light of humanity shining a little brighter.